You're telling people, look, we're going to help you. And maybe you are going to help some of them in the short term, but in the long term, you're going to harm them. So, not yet. So, in the short term, fair trade, I believe, is unfair because although it benefits a small number of farmers, those that get the higher fair trade price, it hurts a lot more those that face a lower price because of fair trade. I believe in the medium term, fair trade is unfair because it encourages inefficient economic production. And in the long term, I have argued that fair trade is unfair because it encourages people to stay in agriculture. But not only is fair trade unfair to people in the less developed countries and to the producers, it is also unfair to people in more developed nations of the world. Now, most of us want to do, all of us want to do something about poverty. And we are being told that the best and the easiest way of helping out is through fair trade. Whereas I have just argued that fair trade is counterproductive from a development perspective in the long term. If we really wanted to be doing if we really wanted to do something successfully about poverty, something successfully about development, what we would be doing is freeing up trade and supporting microfinance in projects and so forth, providing credit to people, encouraging them to move away from agricultural production. We will be spending our development budget in a different manner to fair trade. By encouraging us to contribute, by encouraging us to invest in fair trade rather than in other more effective methods of fostering economic development, fair trade is effectively obtaining our money under false pretenses, right? They're saying we're the best way of doing development when actually they're not the best way. And if they're getting our money under false pretenses, that is unfair. Also, it is unfair because fair trade goods tend, and there are numerous studies that say this, tend to be of lower quality than free market goods. Why? Well, for a very simple reason, right? Most farms will sell maybe 10, 20% of their output through fair trade and the rest on the open market, right? The output they send denied, the output they send to fair trade will be sold anyway, right? The fair trade people are going to buy it. The output they put on the open market will be bought only if it's of a good enough quality that people want to buy it. So what people do is they give their best product and put it on the open market, and they put less good stuff onto the fair trade market. So the people that are buying fair trade are paying a higher price for a lower quality product. And I think for the consumer, that's pretty unfair too. You may do it voluntarily, but it's still unfair on you. And finally, I would actually take issue with something Mike said. Mike said, nobody is coerced into buying fair trade. You always have a choice. Actually, not quite. Starbucks now only sells fair trade coffee. I quite like Starbucks. But Starbucks in Market Square claims they only sell fair trade coffee.
AMT. Let's take AMT.
AMT only sell fair trade coffee. Now, I quite like going to AMT as well. But for the sake of argument, I don't want to pay the higher price for fair trade. But either I can go without my coffee from AMT, or I have to pay the higher price. I don't have a choice here, right? If the only coffee place near me that sells decent coffee, sells fair trade coffee, if they're not offering me a choice, then I don't really have the choice.
It's not a higher price in AMT. It's not a higher price in AMT.
On point of information, when AMT introduced fair trade coffee, they put the price up from £1.30 at Victoria Station in London to £1.45.
That's not the fair trade price.
It's my speech. So the point is, it's also unfair on the consumer because actually the consumer isn't always being offered a price. Because A, the consumer is being morally blackmailed into buying fair trade and only fair trade, because the fair trade propaganda is that you're a bad person if you don't buy fair trade. And B, because sometimes actually you don't have a choice, because the only places that are selling coffee are selling fair trade coffee. They're not selling coffee that isn't fair trade. Denied. Thus, to conclude, I believe fair trade is unfair on both the producer and the consumer. Now, I fully accept that I'm not an expert on the coffee market. If you want to argue the nitty-gritty of the coffee market, well, we have somebody who is a bit of an expert in the coffee market coming up. I want to argue the concept. I think the central idea behind Fairtrade, I think the central principle underlying Fairtrade is deeply counterproductive and deeply unfair. In the short term, it benefits a small number of farmers, and that makes us feel good. But it hurts a much larger number of farmers that end up getting a lower price for their product because of fair trade. And I think this is deeply unfair on them. In the medium term, fair trade, by encouraging farmers to pursue a certain method of production, keeps farmers inefficient. It discourages them from mechanizing, thereby keeping them poor in the longer term, and this is unfair on them. And in the long term, fair trade, by subsidizing people to remain in agriculture, keeps countries from progressing on the path towards industrialization and on towards economic development. And I feel this too is deeply unfair, because you are selling people a policy that you are saying will help them in the short term, whereas in the long term it will actually be to their detriment. So therefore I believe fair trade is unfair to the producers. I also believe fair trade is unfair to consumers because A, we have to pay a higher price for a lower quality product. B, because we are being told this is the best way to do development, when in fact it isn't, so they're getting our money under false pretenses, which is unfair. And finally, because in fact quite often we are not given the choice of whether to buy fair trade or not. Therefore, I contend fair trade is unfair. Thank you.
I would like to thank Rahul for his speech. Now, speaking in second opposition is Ian Redman. Ian is a Deputy Director of the Fair Trade Foundation, so please give him a warm welcome.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I should focus this evening on attempting to rebut the charges levelled against fair trade. The motion here is that fair trade is unfair. It is not for me to prove that fair trade is fair, much as I would love to spend the evening telling you that. What I do want to do is to ask you to bear in mind that according to the principles of justice to which I'm sure this House adheres, I have to demonstrate that the charges levelled by the proposers of this motion are unfounded, baseless, erroneous, in short, false, and I intend to do that. I've heard some interesting comments this evening. I heard that fair trade has potential problems. I heard that fair trade is conceptually weak. I have to tell you, I can't really answer those questions. I'm going to have to tell you about my practical experience in the real world of working for nearly 15 years with farmers and workers in the developing world on fair trade projects, and also nearly 15 years working in the commercial sector. I've had a successful commercial career. I think I know how business works. And I don't find any conflict between that and what we do in fair trade. What I do find is that people keep attacking us about things without really understanding what they do. And one point I want to bring in addition to my speech from David, we had a lot about GM products and whether GM is the saviour of the world. I don't want to go into the detail on that. What I do want to say is, yes, that was correct. Fair trade